adults and children. They're recording. I would say in my music therapy work, my youngest client was a pair of twin premature babies, and our oldest clients can be, in their 90s up to 100 that we work with. So I'm sure we all kind of will know a bit about the power and the magic of music, and you can see why it's so useful to everyone. And hopefully, we're going to dig into that a little bit today. But the sort of hat I'm wearing today is as one of the founders and directors of Voices of Aphasia, which I run with my wonderful colleague Denise Wong. And our main kind of project is the Bath Aphasia Choir. So just quickly, I'm sure a lot of people here know very well what aphasia is, but just in case you haven't come across that word before, it's something that affects up to a third of people that have a stroke, and it causes difficulty with communication. So it might be speech, understanding, reading, writing, but as we'll see later, people can still sing absolutely beautifully very often because of the wonderful ways that our brains work. So we're going to talk about today kind of how music can help lots of different aspects of stroke recovery. Again, I'm sure you're all very familiar with how everyone's stroke is different and will have different impacts, but it can impact people across your physical movement and mobility, using your hands and your arms to do things in our everyday lives, your mood, your communication, and kind of your social interaction as well. It can be obviously quite isolating for the person who's had a stroke, and for carers and family members as well. So we're going to look at how music can help across all of those different ways. And I'd be really, really interested to hear actually when we get to our sort of discussion later, if anyone has had any experience either with music therapy or an aphasia choir, or just using music yourself in your recovery. If you're happy to share a bit later, that is always my favourite thing to hear. Okay, so why music? We're going to think about kind of a piece of music that maybe is particularly meaningful to you. And it could be a song, it could be a piece of classical music, a film score. This morning I was just with a client who DJs kind of lots of 90s house records. It could be that's your thing. Whatever it is, why is it so powerful to us? And music has lots of kind of factors and characteristics that make it so powerful and useful. So generally speaking, unless you're into very experimental modernist classical music, it's quite structured. Songs will often have your introduction, verse, chorus, and then a bridge that changes it up a bit. And it's predictable to a certain level, and that's the real power of music sometimes, when it's a predictable sound, but then it just changes our expectations a little bit, and it can really make you go, oh, I like that. Generally it's repetitive across the sections, and we know if anyone's kind of used it to help with exercising, going to the gym, or just getting up and going in the morning, as I often have to do, it's motivating. It can be really engaging, particularly for people who are maybe in hospital after a stroke and kind of struggling to engage with lots of therapies and activities that they have to do. Music can obviously have positive associations. It can have great memories attached to it maybe, and it can make us go back to previous experiences and younger years. There's a lot of research to show that music that people hear and love when we're kind of teenagers and into our 20s can often be the most powerful thing, kind of hook to bring us back into those memories as we get older, particularly for people that have dementia. I think it's technically called the reminiscence bump. So it's this bump in your lifespan where it really kind of gets you and takes you right back. And a lot of that's because when we're at that age, we're sort of really finding our identity. And I see this with a lot of clients that I work with, and particularly as a teenager and a young adult, music can be such an important part of that, whether you play it or just love it. And we kind of really find ourselves as we're growing up. Something that we'll talk about in more detail is how music kind of can help recall of language. How often do you hear people say, I can't remember where my keys are, but I can remember all the words to the song on an album from 1963, because as we'll see, it's processed and stored in different ways. And we can also use it clinically to help people that have problems with language and communication. And then the music kind of creates anticipation, like we were talking about, where it was structured and predictable, but not quite going exactly where you think it's going to go. And when that chorus comes in, it's just that real kind of release of endorphins, which we can get from music. And there's been some really interesting studies as well around the sort of chills phenomena and the goosebumps that people can get out of music, again, whether it's listening or playing. So yeah, if we just think about what happens maybe in your body if you're listening to a really good tune, and you might notice as well your toes start to tap, or you're clicking along without realising it, tapping on your steering wheel if you're driving, and you start singing along, and it's kind of almost doing these things automatically without us having to make an effort. Okay, so I'm going to show a little bit of this video, which is getting quite old now, but it's something that we find really, really useful to show people how music impacts our brains. So what you see on the screen here is it's basically lots of different MRI images from different participants in this experiment that have been compiled together. So if you think of it as the average brain of the people that did this study, looking from different angles. Now we know that the brain is always a lot more complicated than we think, but there are basically some areas that control certain things. So there's kind of the motor cortex that almost goes over the top of your brain, and we know, for example, that the left hemisphere of that cortex controls your right side and vice versa, which is why damage to one side of the brain results in hemiparesis and having difficulties on the other side of your body. We know there's areas kind of associated with language and memory and emotions and all of these things, but what there isn't is a part of the brain that is the music centre, because music is processed so widely because of all of those things that we've talked about, and it causes activation across lots of different areas, and also, more importantly, connection between those different areas. So hopefully you'll be able to hear, there's no sound at the beginning of this, but it's just kind of based on people who were just listening to music. They're not playing or singing, they're just in a big MRI machine just listening. And we know that this will be even stronger if they were taking part in making the music themselves. So we can see as the music becomes more dramatic, louder, lots of areas across the brain lighting up. So you get that idea. If you want to look that up on YouTube, it's just called the Tango Brain. And yeah, it's really showing that even though the sound waves, which is really just moving air at the end of the day, is going in through our ears and our eardrums, through our auditory nerve, it's causing all of this activity across our brains. And we'll come back in a moment to how that relates to brains of people who have had a stroke as well. But something that we wanted to kind of, whenever I or Denise and I or Emma and I give this presentation, that we always kind of focus on is this funny word, musicking, which is something that we learn quite early in our music therapy training. And it's an idea actually came from someone called Christopher Blacking, who studied with tribes in Africa and looked at their kind of musicology and how music is such an integral part of every part of their lives, and more importantly, their society. So music is something that everyone does, whereas in the Western world, we've kind of adapted to this idea that music is something that some certain people do, talented people maybe do, privileged people do, and they get up on a stage and they perform for everyone else who isn't musical. But that's not the case. The idea of musicking is that whatever you're doing as part of that musical activity, you are part of the act of musicking. So it may be that you're playing in an orchestra, but it might be also that you're sitting in the audience of that concert hall, or that you're teaching yourself the piano at home, or you're sitting listening to one of your favourite records, taking part in a choir. And I know where I live in Bristol and Bath, there's so many amazing community choirs that were just, you know, a richness of things that you could do. You might be going to a festival or a live gig or a club night, whatever you like to do. And then you see we've got people kind of making music together. It's a really powerful way. You might be into musicology and just kind of studying those old scores and looking at the theory of music. Or it might be like, say, the client that I worked with this morning might be a DJ and enjoying putting on your own club nights. But whatever you're doing, you are part of the musical relationship between the people involved and the music itself. So going back to brains for a moment, we know that music, because of the way that it engages so much of our brains in so many different areas, can help to actually make new pathways in your brain. And this is for everyone, whether you've had a brain injury or not, but also particularly when there has been a brain injury, such as in a stroke or a kind of traumatic brain injury as well. So this is a really lovely graphic that I borrowed from the Stroke Association, and it shows number one here, kind of in a healthy brain, if you want to do a particular thing, like reaching over, picking up a cup, taking a drink, swallowing, breathing, talking, a lot going on there, putting it back down safely without dropping it. The messages will go through an established route in our brain. But when a stroke happens, we know that it kills certain brain cells in a particular area. And in some types of stroke, it can be quite kind of localised, the damage that happens. If you have a stroke that involves a bleed on the brain or a brain hemorrhage, the damage can be more widespread. Again, if people have a traumatic brain injury, like in a car accident where there's been a high force, again, the damage can be more widespread in the brain. So it's harder in some ways to make those new pathways, but it's absolutely possible. So after a stroke, those particular brain cells which have died are not able to kind of be revived yet. Maybe one day medicine will get there. But what the brain is really good at doing is making these yellow kind of diversions. And some people use the analogy of the main pathway being the motorway, and then when that's blocked, we have to go around the country lanes, but we still get from A to B eventually, just in a different way. And perhaps if that motorway was shut for 6 months, those country roads would become bigger and they'd have to make them larger to deal with all the traffic. And that's what happens when you do something a different way. Neuroplasticity means that if we do it over and over again, those connections get stronger and stronger and mean that you can relearn to do whatever it is that you want to do. Talking, walking, moving, lots of things that we know are really important to people after a stroke. So yeah, just to summarise that kind of bit, music is processed in all these different areas of our brain, and new pathways can be built around the damaged areas. And that's kind of what we focus on in music therapy, but something you can also really just do for yourself in your everyday life, which is fabulous. We've also got lots of good quality research and studies that shows that music can reduce anxiety and improve mood. Again, I think something that a lot of us know just from living, but it's good to see it researched properly, and increased motivation, both for everyday life activities, but also for engaging in therapy and treatment. So now, as I said, I'm just going to go through those different areas of life and the body that stroke can affect, and think about how music can help in those different ways. So thinking about your kind of mood and your well-being, and also your cognitive skills, which we know can be kind of quite a subtle impact sometimes of stroke. It's not, well, it's very much invisible to people outside, and it may take a while and lots of assessment to work out exactly what has been affected in your cognition before you can start to work on making it better. But lots of things that can help. So making music with loved ones is something I really love to do in my work. So not just thinking about the person that's had a stroke, but their whole family. It might be including grandchildren or old friends and kind of people that they've already enjoyed music with, and helping to support that relationship musically. Improvising music can be really powerful, I know when I started my music therapy training, I'm kind of a classical flautist and piano player by background. Never really learnt how to improvise, and it was quite scary to me. And then I realised the absolute power of it and how you can help people that have got, very, very little musical experience to hear their musical offerings kind of reflected back to them in a way that is really, really like connecting between you. And we also learned that there's no wrong notes, which is sometimes more true than not. And sometimes listening to your favourite music and just reminiscing about the memories that it brings together can be really lovely. We do know as well from a study that listening to music for just 10 minutes a day, music with lyrics, supported both cognitive and language recovery in people who had a stroke. So it can just be as little as that or as much as you want. Some people like to explore songwriting as well, if it's something that maybe you've done before your stroke, or it's something that you just want to try. And songs don't have to be shared with anyone if you don't want to. Some of the work that we do with individuals might be looking at people's identity kind of before and after a stroke or brain injury, and thinking about kind of what's changed, what is the same, what they want to do, and putting that into a song can be really powerful. I worked with one gentleman who had quite severe aphasia, and we were talking about what he wanted, what his goals were for the future, and he was able to say getting better. So we wrote a song together, and that was the chorus was getting better, and the verses were about him before and now and what he wanted for the future. So it was a really lovely piece of work. And then the kind of my speciality, which has come out of running this lovely choir that you'll see in the bottom photo, that is the Bath Aphasia Choir. I think this was kind of last summer this was taken. We've grown a lot in number since then. And if it's not something that you've tried and that you're able to access where you are, it's a really lovely way of kind of bonding with people together that have had the same experience or similar experiences, and just connecting through making the music, and then having the very important tea and coffee and biscuits afterwards. And we know from our participants and other research how much that kind of raises people's mood. It's really important. And a couple of cool studies that I like. You can see here the gentlemen on the left are, they sing in a choir or kind of a trio together, and they monitored their heart rate and their breathing activity whilst they were singing together. And that all kind of synchronized across them, which makes sense when you think about when we're singing, we're taking breaths between the lines and breathing more deeply and perhaps sort of slower than we would when we're talking, but also the heart rate comes into line with the music that we're making, which is lovely. And then the other study was of kind of a music therapy session, but not a typical one, because you can see people have the EEG caps on their heads. But this was people improvising music together. Again, they found in the moments where the music therapist and the participant both said they felt some kind of connection, at that time their brainwave activity was actually kind of synchronizing, which is really amazing to see. Okay, so these diagrams can look a little bit scary, but I'm just going to use them to make a bit of a point, where we talked about the difference between speaking and singing. So on the left, the brain that you see is kind of, if I turn that way, looking from the left-hand side at that left hemisphere. And you might have heard people mention these different areas of the brain. The Broca's area, which generally speaking is responsible for producing language and talking, and the Wernicke's area, which is generally responsible for kind of understanding language. And there's kind of a very important bit of brain between them that connects them up, and all of that comes together to produce your spoken language. Most people, it's in the left hemisphere. Very occasionally, in people that are left-handed, it shows up in the right hemisphere, but that's kind of the exception, not the rule. So that means that if there is damage from a stroke in that particular area, it can have, as we know, a really kind of devastating effect sometimes on people's ability to speak and to generate language. But when we think about singing, we're going to look at the other diagram now, which is, if you imagine looking down from the top of the brain, with the top of the diagram being the front and the bottom being the back. And you can see where all of these coloured dots are, or where kind of activation happened when people were singing. And the majority of them are actually in the right hemisphere. So it's almost like a mirror image, but a little bit more complicated. That it's just, you know, kind of a little bit counterintuitive, but it is what we see scientifically when people are singing, the activities on the other hemisphere. And that is why, scientifically, people can quite often sing. Now, I know for one of my choir members, he first discovered this when he was still in hospital after his stroke, and a friend came to visit. I think it was his birthday. He couldn't say a single word, but he started to sing "Happy Birthday to You," and it came out perfectly. And that's actually something that speech therapists and music therapists might do as a bit of an assessment, is to ask people, can you sing "Happy Birthday"? And sometimes they go, oh, I can. And this is also happens for sort of lots of automatic speech. So it might be the days of the week. Once you start someone off, Monday, Tuesday, they can carry on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There was another gentleman I worked with who again had very little spoken language, but when we played through a song that was by one of his favourite artists, he was able to say Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, because they were kind of linked in his automatic speech. Some people find it with things like the Lord's Prayer, if they know it very well, or kind of Christmas carols, anything like that. And in some of my research that I did for my music therapy dissertation, actually, most people were not told, and you can understand this is not always a priority at first after a stroke, once you've saved someone's life, but they were still not told at any point that they might be able to still sing. And when they found this out, it was actually quite a strange feeling. It was wonderful in many ways, but also like, I don't understand, why is this happening, and you know, am I magically cured, or what's going on? So that's something that I really push for, is for people to know in that acute and subacute stage of stroke recovery, to be able to explain that to people and basically why it works. So yeah, as I was saying, there's lots of things that are well preserved, things that are well known, like Happy Birthday, or a song associated with your favourite football team. And it's really interesting to see from our aphasia choir that it's actually not just well-known songs and lyrics. People are capable, people with aphasia, of learning the lyrics to songs that they don't know very well. Maybe they know the chorus, but they don't know the verses. But through practice, they can learn them. And we know that people can create their own lyrics, and through practice, again, learn how to sing them perfectly. So that's really lovely to see. Okay. So still in that area of like language and communication, we know that doing singing, whether it's in a group or with your family or in a one-to-one therapy session, really helps people in building confidence in using their voice. And that's both for singing, but also for speaking. So after a stroke, it can feel, I understand, kind of different in your own voice. And you can lose your confidence, understandably, in using it to communicate. But getting used to the new normal and also bringing back those skills can be really, really important in helping people to just be heard and understood. As I've talked about with singing and vocal exercises, and there will be a chance to have a go at some of these later, we are helping with the breathing, the breath control, the depth of breath, and then ultimately the volume of people's voice that comes out, and things like dysphonia, where it can sound quite hoarse. Again, I know someone in our choir, he actually has one of his vocal folds paralysed as a result of his stroke. So he's only really working on one, and his voice was very, very quiet at first, and now you would not know to talk to him that he's got any difficulties with his vocal folds. Then sometimes with a stroke, even if you don't have aphasia, so say the stroke's been in the right hemisphere, you might still experience dysarthria, which is where kind of the muscles around the mouth and the tongue and the throat and all of those things involved in speaking and articulating are not kind of coordinated as well, or they might be kind of slightly paralysed, and it can sound like slightly slurred speech. And I know, unfortunately, some people kind of get accused of being drunk and, you know, all sorts of horrible things, when actually it's a result of their stroke. And you might, if you're in that situation, have some exercises set by a speech therapist to repeat sounds like pa 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 pa, ta 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 ta, which is okay, but it's not much fun to do. So if we can help people sing something like Papa's got a head like a ping pong ball, Papa's got a head like a ping pong ball, Papa's got a head like a ping pong ball, like a ping pong ball. Or another song that we like to do is they paved paradise, put up a parking lot. And then it gives you the chance to just practice those target sounds in a slightly more fun way, hopefully. And then the other thing is a very specific form of therapy we can do called melodic intonation therapy, which can help people that have aphasia and sometimes apraxia of speech, which is about, again, the coordination and the motor planning involved in getting the speech sounds actually successfully out of your mouth. Some of you might have experienced this, but the principle is that you take a phrase, it might even be a word if people have very severe aphasia, that people want to be able to say. And we use the same principle as like the happy birthday thing, that we make a little new tune and then we just sing that tune with those words over and over and over again. It becomes so well learnt and ingrained initially in the right hemisphere that people can cue themselves by kind of imagining or humming the tune to say that phrase, and then gradually it will get more spoken and less sung. And there's actually some really interesting studies done about how then the connections start to move back to the left hemisphere sometimes after melodic intonation therapy. So a really kind of simple example you can see there is someone might just want to say, "What's for dinner?" So we would think about what's the kind of key important sounds here. It's the what's for dinner. And then the tune would go and then I practice lots of times singing with the person, "What's for dinner? What's for dinner?" And I start to fade myself out. So I go, "What's for?" And eventually you just get to wah, and people can complete it themselves. And then I would do it and the person would repeat, go backwards and forwards a few times. And then after a little break, I might ask them, if you were hungry and you were wondering, you know, what you were going to be eating that evening, what could you ask? And if they still struggle, I can go, or what? And then people can normally cue it themselves. It can get quite long sometimes. So I worked with someone who he did have a card, I know lots of people have, saying I've had a stroke and I've got aphasia, and kind of explains what it is. But we actually worked on a whole phrase that he sang, "I have had a stroke and I have got aphasia. Please speak slowly and give me plenty of time." And he was able to kind of say that whole sentence or phrase, which is really, really lovely. Okay, and then we're going to quickly talk about movement, and this is going back to the tapping your toes or clicking along to a song, and the power of that. And the way it works, it's called the motor entrainment response, and it's the reason why, mostly in babies, when they start to crawl, we have a left, right kind of rhythm. And then as we walk, if you're someone that hasn't had a stroke or a brain injury, I guarantee you probably don't think very kind of consciously when you're walking, unless you're marching in the army. But again, it becomes unconscious. You're like, right, I'm going to lift my left foot and my right foot, now my left foot, because our brain does that automatically to a sort of internal pulse that we have, which obviously can be affected if we're hearing an external pulse in the music as well. This is a lovely automatic thing that can be really used to help people rehabilitate their movement. We use it a lot in Parkinson's disease as well, because there people obviously have difficulties with movement, with initiating and controlling movement, and people can freeze. So one lady I worked with just had a metronome that she would take out with her, and if she needed to cross the road, she would have going in her ear so that she could keep going. So yeah, that's the kind of principle that we're using to do all sorts of things, particularly exercises to music. We had a lovely start to our day actually at the Bristol Aphasia Stroke Wellbeing Day, doing some gentle exercise to music, and it just keeps you going for longer. And it could be that you say, okay, do this movement for the verse and then this movement for the chorus, and it just gives you that little motivation to keep going a bit longer. We can also really target that, it's kind of in the bottom right here, where the gentleman kind of hitting a cymbal in a particular way. And this might be for someone that I'm working with at the moment actually, who wants to be able to feed himself independently. So it's about bringing the hand up to there, down onto drum, up and down and up and down, and practicing that by actually hitting something, so you're getting that tactile and auditory feedback that you're in the right place, and the beat of the music makes it easier to continue and to use the entrainment to do it more easily. Yeah, walking to music or a metronome, again something that physiotherapists will use as well quite a lot, and you have to sometimes walk backwards with people playing on the guitar or holding a speaker, and it's a bit of a coordination challenge for us, but really, really effective. And with that, you can still use it if someone's got like a 3-point gait, so if they're using a stick, you can still use the rhythm and the pulse to make it more even, and to either speed up or slow down people's walking depending on what they need to be safe. We also tend to work with lots of people who maybe were musical and played instruments before their stroke, and obviously there can be a huge amount of emotional kind of effects from that if you're not able to instantly go back to playing the piano or guitar or violin, whatever it might be. So a lot of our work can be in supporting people to kind of process that, but also thinking at the right time in their recovery, is there a way to use it to perhaps help their stroke recovery? So a lady in our choir played the piano, and after her stroke she would just practice her scales using her effective hand, and she says now like she can't play the piano like she did before, but she thinks that it really helped her getting that fine motor movement back in her fingers, and having a bit more control and being able to, you know, hold things in everyday life and drive her car and all of these things. There's also a really good charity called the One-Handed Musical Instrument Trust, I think they're called, OMI, and they do what it says on the tin, so they can make adaptations if people can't use one hand at all, that they can still play an instrument. And something that's been really helpful, I don't know how music therapists kind of operated before this, but using the iPad, there's lots of virtual instruments that can be used just with the slightest touch of a finger. And there's GarageBand, which kind of comes pre-installed on all iPads, which is just an Apple thing. But it's got this virtual guitar you can see, and you can either play the individual notes or you can play chords. And then it's got this autoplay where it can sound like a country and western song or strumming. And there's so much that you can do with it without having to actually have a guitar at all. And I'm happy to share these with everyone, because there's just a list of some of my favourite iPad apps that I like to use. And then, yeah, just to finish off, thinking about how music can help your well-being generally. And we put this slide together for a conference that we presented at all about well-being and aphasia. I don't know if anyone was there in Coventry. If so, sorry you've heard this twice now. But we think about the 5 ways to well-being, which is something that some organisations use to really think about, you know, it's all very well saying look after your well-being, but what does that actually mean? And the research shows that these are the factors that help people in their well-being. So connecting, again, we've talked about listening to music together, having a chat about music, going to an aphasia choir, connecting with new people who know what you're going through, all of those things. Taking notice, mindfully listening to music, be a really easy and peaceful thing to do on your own, and just noticing how it makes you feel, and not kind of pushing, if those feelings are difficult, not pushing them away, but just kind of noticing. Helping or giving is a big thing. So it might be that you're volunteering at a group, if that's something that's accessible for you, or raising funds for a music therapy charity, for example. Keeping learning is very important. So trying a new instrument or using technology, a bit like we were talking about at the beginning of our meeting. If you've got someone that's able to help you access these things and try out new technology, you never know what you might learn to do. And then learning the words to a song or singing a meaningful phrase. And then being active. And I know for everyone that doesn't necessarily look like, you know, it would before your stroke, or being able to run a half marathon or whatever it is, but being active can mean as little as tapping your toes to a piece of music, or getting out to go to a choir or a music group, and also listening to your favourite music whilst you're walking and exercising, if that's something that you're doing for your kind of rehab generally. And yeah, I would just say kind of about music generally, all of these things, pretty much all of the things that I've talked about, are possible to do without having a music therapist working one-to-one with you. A lot of them will be easier to do with that support. So music therapists, just in case people aren't aware, we are in the UK trained to a master's degree level. I have a music degree before that. Some people have a degree in psychology or something like that, but are also musicians. And then we're registered with the HCPC, the Health and Care Professions Council, who look after lots of different allied health professionals, so speech and language therapists, OTs, radiographers, dietitians. There's a whole load of professions. Basically, anything that isn't doctors, nurses and midwives really tend to be under the HCPC. So it's kind of a very controlled, it's a protected title, so you can't just call yourself a music therapist unless you're trained in that way. We know there are so many amazing musicians out there though who are community musicians, which is something that I do as well, or volunteer musicians that will go in to play in hospitals, and that's all really, really important as well. But yeah, if it's something, it's a bit of a goal of mine, is to be able to get music therapy onto the NICE guidelines about stroke rehab, because that's how the NHS kind of sort out their budget and recruit staff based on what the NICE guidelines say. NICE are currently saying that there's lots of evidence that music therapy is a good thing, but not quite the big randomised controlled trial levels of evidence that they need. So fingers crossed that will be able to happen, and then it might be something available on the NHS. But at the moment, you could look at BAMT, which is the British Association for Music Therapy, who have a list of music therapy providers and individual music therapists, if that's something you're interested in. And then have a look at your potential local aphasia choir. So we have our group in Bath. We'll have one soon in Bristol, but we also have a hybrid option, and my colleagues Sharon and Becky also run a fully online aphasia choir on Mondays called Voices of Aphasia Online. There's lots of kind of projects springing up around the UK. So what we're going to do, just before we have a go, just to say something else that you might come across is neurologic music therapy, which is a kind of specialised training that we can do, all about kind of all these techniques that we can use for people that have brain injuries and neurologic conditions. So I thought, not sure how we're doing for time, but we could have a little quick go at some of the warm-ups and the song that we do at the Bath Aphasia Choir, so you can get a little taster and have a song in your head to take away for the rest of the day. So the way that we start with our warm-ups, I should say normally I have Denise playing the piano with me, so I'm going to use a backing track in a moment. It's almost the full experience. But we like to check in with how we're sitting, and kind of this is our way of making our choir accessible, that everyone's able to sit down and just be comfortable. But we imagine a piece of string coming from the top of your head, holding you up straight. And then we talk about being not tense like this, but relaxing, and we do a few warm-up exercises to get ourselves into that state. And if you put a hand, say, just under your ribs, at the top of your belly, and as you breathe in through your nose, see if you can feel that moving outwards, and then breathe out through your mouth and feel it pushing in. So we'll just do a couple of deep breaths together. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4. And when you finish that breath, let it fill up right down into your belly. And then we like to get our diaphragms working by saying like a hiss sound. And we normally have a bit of a competition at choir, see who can hold that the longest. So I'll count us in. 1, breathing in, 2, 3, 4. And then really feel that pushing from your diaphragm as that sound's coming out. I will trust that someone out there has won our competition. And then we just do a ha sound, and this is to explore the high and low sounds. So we go ha, 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 ha. Turn it into a bit of a giggle, and then it makes everyone laugh and smile as well. And then this is getting more and more common. I saw my first wasp the other day when I was out in the sunshine. And for these ones, it's really interesting if you can make a fist of 1 or 2 hands and push it into the side of your waist, and you might feel some other muscles kind of kicking in down there as we make that sound to get our tongue wobbling. And then something we like to do is using just a sound. Again, this is sort of getting lots of nice warm air through your vocal folds if you haven't used them very much, and exploring the pitch range, which sometimes we can lose a bit. And something I've been challenging the choir to do at the moment is that people will go and move their whole heads, which looks quite funny, but we don't actually need to. So we'll follow the shapes basically and go and then we get a bit more complicated. And then this is my favourite one, which is where everyone's on their roller coaster. So take a nice deep breath. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. And just follow it up and down. You can see moving the eyebrows is kind of compulsory. You can't really stop that. And then we do lots more warm-ups than that, but we're getting all of our face and our cheeks and our tongue and everything ready to go. And we do lots on vowel sounds like ooh, ee, and ah. And then at the end of our warm-ups, we bring in the bumblebee to add back in some consonants, but think about doing it with your whole face as we sing bumblebee, 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 bumblebee. And it really gets everyone warmed up across the range. Okay, so I thought we would just sing one of our favourite songs together to finish off my bit of the talk today. And it's been quite appropriate, hopefully, recently with Here Comes the Sun. It talks about it's been a long, cold, lonely winter and how lovely it is to see that spring sun coming back in. We do also do quite a lot of Beatles tracks. We know a lot of people are familiar with them and love them, but we also like to take requests from our choir members, which challenges me sometimes to learn some new songs. So I'm just going to get my speaker paired up so we can have a sing through. But you'll see on the slides here how we'll use not many words, a couple of lines per slide, and we put the key words in bold to sort of support people with aphasia, and use some pictures to show kind of what the meanings of the lines are, because we know some people have difficulties with reading. I also know a lot of people just watch my mouth really carefully, and I kind of try to show people the pitch a little bit and just general conducting when we're coming in and when we're stopping. So I thought we'd just have a sing through. Unfortunately, because of the limitations of Zoom, we can't have people unmuted, otherwise it would be absolute chaos. But if you want to, you are really welcome to have a sing along wherever you are today, at home, in the office, nice and loudly. And we'll do a little bit of the Beatles. Okay, just find the right one. Again, noticing all of those things, how it's making you feel, whether you have any memories that come back to you, whether you feel it in your body, and if you notice, oh, I haven't sung this for a long time, but I suddenly remember all of those words. Here we go. This is Denise actually playing during the pandemic when she recorded all of these. And we go, 2, 3, 4. Here comes the sun, do-do-do-do. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, do-do-do-do. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. And little darling, the smiles returning to the faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, do-do-do-do. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. And then we'll get ready for this next bit, which is my favourite bit. 1, 2, 3. Sun, 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 here it comes. One more time. Sun, 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 here it comes. And then you can have a little tap along if you want. 1, 2, 3, 4. Little darling, I feel that ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun, do-do-do-do. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. It's alright. It's alright. And give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you for joining in. I will stop sharing there. And yeah, thanks very much.